And welcome in to another episode of Heat of the Moment. My name is Micah. I'm joined, as always, by my fellow host and friend, Lino. Today, we'll be talking a little bit about the Heat's recent West Coast road trip, and of course, some updates in the Jimmy Butler saga. Lino, your heart as a Heat fan this past week, how have you been feeling? What emotions have been going on in your head?
I don't remember how many specific steps there are in the steps of grief, but I feel like I've traveled through them all at this point and reached acceptance to the point where, I've had my angry moments, I've had my bargaining. I was on the trade machine trying to find something, trying to bargain a way out of this. I got angry, I got, detached at a certain point, and now I'm just back to, this is Heat basketball, baby. I'm here to riding out the Jaime Jaquez and Nikola Jovic train to the end, I suppose. But I think there's still a little bit of me that thinks Jimmy might still be on this team for the next year or so. So,
Yeah.
and it's interested to get into it with you. But how are you
Yeah.
doing lately?
I'm good. And honestly, that's the perfect segue into this because it really is at the heart of all of this. So we will get into some actual kind of game breakdowns, X's and O's, what we've been seeing lately. But for the news part of this segment, there hasn't been any super tangible Jimmy Butler updates, but there's been some rumors, some reporting that we at least want to keep you guys up to date on. So I would say early this past week, there were reports that Memphis and Milwaukee were two teams that had at least registered interest in Jimmy Butler. And you can kind of form those trade packages, something based around Marcus Smart's salary from Memphis. The Milwaukee one's more complicated because they're over the second apron, but it would probably be Chris Middleton would be the big salary moving, and they'd have to send Pat Connaughton somewhere else, something like that. So, as Heat fans, I think you and I both were kind of like, okay, let's get in the trade machine. What can we get? Jake LaRavia, who can we get that we might be excited about? And then a few days go by, and then Chris Haynes releases a statement, which, side note, Chris Haynes is calling his breaking news tweets Haynes briefs, which
Goated.
is so crazy. But I respect it. And so he says that Jimmy Butler's team, Jimmy Butler's agent, whatever, has reached out to multiple teams. He only named Memphis, but it's kind of implied Milwaukee was the other one since they had been brought up this week, and said he didn't want to play there. He didn't want to be traded there. So as a Heat fan, and just kind of an observer of all of this, that makes it feel like whether it's always been this way or it is this way now, it's become Phoenix or nothing for Jimmy. It seems like he's trying to force his way to the Suns, presumably because they have basically guaranteed, whether it's to him directly or in his team or just through these different media channels, that they will give him this max he wants. Now, of course, that's easy for them to say because they already have $110 million committed to Bradley Beal over the next 2 years. So why not give that to Jimmy Butler? But that is the crux of this issue, is that Bradley Beal is on that team. He's on a massive contract. And while Bradley Beal isn't bad, he is not good enough to justify the contract he is on. And on top of all of this, he has a no trade clause, which brings us basically to our last piece of news, that Bradley Beal's agent comes out to Brian Windhorst of ESPN and is like, Brad has not been approached about any of this. He's not been asked about waiving his trade clause, and basically established for a perfect scenario, he would waive his trade clause once, but he would never amend the contract so that he no longer had a no trade clause, which is an important distinction for Miami, because I think ultimately they don't want the Beal contract, but I don't think they would ever have someone with a no trade clause at this point. So, Lino, a lot of information there. What were your kind of thoughts as all this played out over the past week?
Um, the first thing that I thought of, and the first thing I feel like I noticed in not only Heat fan conversations and Heat Nation conversations, but even just in general NBA conversations, I feel like this really soured things as far as Jimmy's goodwill with just viewers. I think they were on the side of Jimmy for most of it in regards to the fact that, he said he wants to go anywhere. He's given his all to Miami, which to a degree is very true as far as what he's done and that they should do right by him. But him coming back and pretty much tanking whatever Memphis Grizzlies trade there is there, which I understand to a degree. There weren't many scenarios where they'd be able to pay him as well as pay all the guys, because I think his contract and Jaren Jackson Jr.'s contract would come up at the same time or something like that. And that's just going to be some cap space hell that they'd get into. And so maybe Jimmy just doesn't want to go somewhere he can't get paid. And so he tried to, get away from that. And it just, that kind of stuff, when you get into this situation, just makes it tougher and tougher to side with Jimmy on all this. Like, I get where he's coming from and I get that he wants to get paid, but for me, it becomes much less emotional or about anything that Miami did besides not pay him. I feel like much less about, I guess the way he was treated here. And I do think, for the most part, he was treated pretty fairly. But all of this is kind of ugly because you're trying to literally force like a circle piece into a square hole. Like, it doesn't work. Bradley Beal has a trade clause in there that he is not going to give up. He didn't put it in there just so he could give it up to go wherever. That is why it's there. And it doesn't take contract geniuses to see that and understand that. So it's frustrating because I feel like he's trying to twist, we don't work for the Miami Heat, but he's trying to twist the Heat's arm into making something happen that is virtually impossible, when really he could have just waited out his contract and got his extension there somewhere else, or figured something else out down the road. So it's unfortunate that it took all this hoopla for a situation that might end up in him just being here anyways until
Mhm.
the off season. So
Yeah. No,
we'll
I
see what
felt
happens.
I felt similarly. It just, to me, I think losing goodwill, the way you put it, it makes a lot of sense, because to me, the Memphis fit on court is awesome. Like, they need
I would have
that.
loved it.
Yeah, they need that alpha wing. He fits kind of that grit and grind mentality that team still has. Taylor Jenkins is an awesome coach, top 3 seed in the West. Like, really, if Jimmy was on that team without, giving up their main 3 guys, I think that's an automatic championship contender. And so for him to shut that down before it really ever got started, it was just a little discouraging. But again, like you said, this is all about money. Even his comments about finding joy, his role, all those things, while he may feel those things, that he probably wouldn't be if he was paid how he wanted to be paid. And that's just kind of what it all comes back to, which, as a fan, I get. Like, he thinks he's worth that. He's played at that level previously. I understand that. But like you said, it just makes it tougher. And that's why when we did our first show last week, I was like, I just want this to be done as quickly as possible, because the longer this plays out, Jimmy has shown he will get nastier, for lack of a better word. He will push the envelope until he is out of Miami.
Did you see the video with the barista today?
Yes, tell the people if they didn't see it.
Oh my gosh. So I guess on his story, he posted a video at the Big Face coffee pop-up that they have. Just him complimenting this barista and saying good job. And he then starts complimenting himself as a boss, which is a crazy thing to do, by the way. Like, isn't it cool how I'm building you up and not tearing you down like a good boss should? And then he looks at the camera, very Jim from The Office like, and just smiles. And then the story's over. And it's like, okay, it's a bit heavy-handed. It's very funny to me, but it's very much that this has everything to do with Pat and Jim, and so that's just what it's going to be like moving forward, I guess.
Yeah, to me it was, and this will kind of transition to our next talking point. To me, it was a discouraging sign of things to come. We'll talk about it, but the Heat have now won 2 in a row on this road trip, not against elite competition by any means, but the energy in the team seems better. And like we keep talking about, the Heat and Jimmy are in this stalemate right now, where I think the most likely thing is he'll be back after this suspension. And posting stuff like that, posting some of the songs he's posted on his Instagram story about knowing my worth and things like that, make it seem like he's not going to just come back and be a perfect citizen. I think he will continue to make waves and make this uncomfortable. Because again, that's really his only course of action as he sees it. So I get that to a degree, but it is tough, because I'm watching Nico and Jaime and all these guys have fun, and the bench is standing up and everybody's celebrating. I think Pella Larson actually hit Josh Christopher in the face after a Khalil Ware dunk last game, which was
Wow.
hilarious. But they were that excited on the bench. And then here comes Jimmy, who at one point would have loved all that, would have entered into it, and now I feel like is going to function more as a bit of a thundercloud, an awkward thundercloud that's going to hang over the team. So, Lino, as it stands right now, if you had to guess, will Jimmy be playing in that Denver game in a week from today, really? And what will the vibes be, you think, if he does play?
Will he be playing? I don't think so. Will he be there in a jersey on the bench, hanging out in his full sweats? There's a pretty good chance of that for sure. We'll see. I think Spo. The one thing I will say is that he still has a certain level of goodwill with me that I don't think he would do something to either embarrass Spo or to hurt, Bam or Tyler or these guys, or even like Jovic. Like Jovic is his guy. Like he loves that kid. And so I don't think he would purposely ever do anything on the court to do that. And I don't think it would be beneficial for him to do that as far as um just underperforming in a way that hurts them, because I think he does care about those guys. It's different than like, Harden's situation where he's playing on this team of guys he really doesn't know at all and doesn't want to be there. This is a very different thing. And so if he were to, I feel like he and Spo would come to an agreement or some kind of understanding of his role and what he wants while he's out there. And I think he'll get to play the best basketball he can because he kind of needs to, because at a certain point he also has to show his worth and his value to, I guess, whoever's going to pay him next. It'd be very surprising if you got out there and just, started doing some insane stuff. What do you think?
Yeah.
Do you feel like
Yeah,
he's going to blow it up
this
on court?
if I had to guess, I think he'll be playing. I think he'll start. I think he'll play probably a fewer minutes than normal, but still probably like 30 plus. And I think he'll be like disengaged Jimmy. I don't think it'll be
Hmm.
to the level of like the New Orleans and the Indiana game that kind of started all this. But yeah, I just think he won't be super aggressive. To me, one thing that really stands out about Jimmy's level of engagement, especially in this new role, this is like the lowest usage he's had in a long time, is his offensive rebounding. There's that Detroit game where he had a crazy stat line. It was like 30 something, 16, like triple double. It was insane. And so much of that was off offensive rebounding. And to me, that's something, if you're a Heat fan, if you want to watch out for something on Denver, the possessions where Jimmy is stashed in the corner, which, the first few games of the season, we were having discussions. Why are Jimmy and Bam just sitting in the corner? It's not like this is a
Hmm.
brand new thing, but there's the opportunity to look to be aggressive and look to be impactful in that space, or there's kind of the alternative that he did in the New Orleans and Indiana game where he was like, well, I'm just chilling here. Like, oh, you passed me the ball, I'm giving it to Haywood. Y'all got it. And it'll be that kind of dynamic that I'm looking for, where it's like, is he picking his spots within this role, making the best of it? Or what I fear is more likely is he's just going to be very passive in that role. And,
Hmm.
he'll still defend, he'll still take open shots, probably try and get to the line. But I think it'll be a diminished version of Jimmy. And I think that puts, I think, like you mentioned, Spo in a really tough spot, because
Yeah.
that press conference where Jimmy blew up, Jimmy was the second person to speak at that press conference. Spo went first, was asked the same questions about Jimmy being in the corner. And he's like, yeah, in the second half, we had him play point. We want him to get more engaged. I'll work on ways to get him more involved. He knows how to do it. I know how to do it. So as a coach, like from Spo's perspective, I'm like, man, that's so tough. You're probably getting this guy is mailing it in. Is it your job to try and get the best out of him? Is the best option to kind of ignore him, let him be PJ Tucker and just emphasize these other guys? It's really tough. So yeah, it's gonna be awkward. It's gonna be really, really strange.
I am excited to see what happens. I think on the bright side, I've seen some conversations online about, why bring Jimmy back when clearly, for better or for worse, we have to focus on the development of guys like Jovic and Jaquez. Like, why bring him back? Why start him? Like, obviously, Jimmy is way better than both of them, but if he's not going to try and they need the minutes, you might as well just leave him on the bench. I think you're right though that Jimmy's going to go out there and play defense and he's going to move the ball around. Like he's not going to get in the way. He's just probably not going to participate, which is not the worst thing ever. Like it's not like Jimmy's usage in the regular season was crazy high to begin with. Like we won't get that fourth quarter crazy effort that we would typically get when we needed it to win a close game. But at the same time, that's just going to open up opportunities for other people to step up, which is what we're going to have to do anyways once he's gone. So might as well just let it all happen as it happens. And so long as he isn't, actively trying to, harm the guys and their ability to do their jobs the best way, then I don't see any problem with it, I suppose. It's sad it's gotten to this point, but like I said, once you get through the stages of grief, you just kind of live with the results.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be the most anticipated game of the year. I think that will get national attention as far as people being like, like
Yeah.
Zach Lowe, who we're all missing dearly in these times. He tweeted out after the Indiana game before the New Orleans blow up. He was like, "I watched the Miami game last night. I'm very interested to see how their next few games go." And literally, the next game was when Jimmy had the crazy press conference. So it's definitely the trending topic right now. So we'll see how those things go. But yeah, I think that's pretty much the Jimmy thing aside. I still would say, like, personally, I hope a trade can happen before then, just so everyone can move on. And that's only because I don't think reconciliation is a possibility anymore. Obviously, if there's a way for Jimmy to be happy and get extended, I love Jimmy. I want him to be on the team. It would be great, but that seems pretty far from reality. So that's kind
I
of.
wanted to actually ask you, before we move on to other stuff,
Mhm.
with the way this is going with Jimmy, is there a way where this doesn't go this way in the league? I feel like in the NFL, a quarterback wants to get paid, or somebody wants to get paid. They sit out of training camp until someone says, "Okay, fine, we'll pay you." Then they get paid, then they show up and they do their jobs. And it's kind of like they're going through the motions. I never really see or they go somewhere else. Like Saquon Barkley didn't get paid, found somebody else to pay him and went. But I feel like it's such an emotional situation when it comes to contracts in the NBA for some reason. I don't know if it's because it's more money or because it's a smaller roster. And so maybe, you feel maybe more personally identified as not being worthy of the money. Whereas, in the NFL, there's like 52 other guys that got to get paid or something like that. I just am so curious. Do you feel like is this just the new normal for contract negotiation with superstars once they hit their mid 30s? Like, does everybody just have to go through this?
It's an interesting question. I think it's two parts. One, is this unavoidable with Jimmy Butler? It feels like that answer is yes now. I wanted to say, with Miami it could be different, but this has happened again. So I do think that's kind of the case. Is it avoidable overall with aging superstars? Probably. I mean, we talked about the Paul George example
Yeah, that's true.
last show. Played 70 games, played well, and then got his max, from a different team, but essentially was in the same spot where there was back and forth about the extension he was going to get with the Clippers. So I think it just depends on the guy and how comfortable he is with the market. I think that's part of the issue is, Paul George, I'm assuming, at least had an idea, like everybody knew 2 years ago that Philly was clearing cap space to have a max slot. Right now, everyone's very aware the only team with max cap space this summer is Brooklyn, who isn't interested in Jimmy. They're rebuilding. They don't want an aging superstar. So his situation is different in that way. And of course, Jimmy's going to take things to extremes that a lot of people, a lot of players wouldn't. But
Mhm.
yeah, I do think there's a way to get it done. And again, like we talked about, I think both sides, had missteps with that. I think Pat should have understood, like, you're kind of on eggshells with Jimmy this year. You don't need him to tell him to shut his mouth in the press conference. And same thing with Jimmy. Like, you kind of understand you are getting paid $50 million. His team needs you to play. Your teammates and coach need you to play, and you're not showing up. So I think it's tough on both sides. But yeah, is it avoidable for the right kind of guy? It's avoidable. And for the wrong kind of guy, this happens. And not to
Yeah.
say Jimmy is completely wrong in this, but he's not the type of dude you want to get into this kind of negotiation. And neither is Pat
It's true.
Riley. That's what we keep going back to. It's
Yeah.
two, for lack of a better word, alphas that are not going to back down. And I don't think ego's getting put aside for either of these guys. I think they're kind of
Mm-mm.
hoping to be saved by Golden State getting desperate or Phoenix finding
No.
someone to take Beal. I think those are the realistic avenues out of this. It feels unrealistic that either side's going to be like, yeah, we'll just relent. You can have whatever you want.
Shout out to the Golden. I'm glad we're on this particular road trip that we're about to talk about because of the opponents that we're facing. The ability to defeat them would have been a
Yes.
great chance to show, hey, you need Jimmy more than we
Yeah.
need the players on your team.
Yeah.
This is the case for
Honestly,
some of these, but
Yeah, no, that's a good segue, especially to that Golden State game. Miami ends up
Mhm.
winning that one by 16. It was the first win of the road trip. There were great performances by a lot of different guys up and down the roster, and it does. If you want to look at it that way, I mean, Curry looked really sad afterwards. The team kind of just looked old and not super talented. Miami's on the second night of a back to back after double overtime loss to the Kings, and they're still able to get in there and win. So it was a bad look for Golden State. Of course, all the reporting right now is still saying, they won't trade Kuminga. They're not really interested in paying Jimmy. But if there were ever a way to change that, it could happen. But yeah, to do a quick recap, basically 4 games have happened since our last episode. I did make the crucial mistake last episode of saying the words, "This is as bad as it'll get." And and we proceeded to lose by 36 to the Utah Jazz at home. So that's completely on me. I
Oh,
will never say that again. And so that was a brutal loss. We got a Bryce Sensabaugh all up and down the court. Shout out
sensational.
shout out to Sensafridia. Shout out to Pablo Escobar on TikTok. But yeah, so big loss to Utah. That's at home. Then we start the West Coast road trip at Sacramento without De'Aaron Fox. Heat have a 17-point lead with 8 minutes left in the game. Go on to lose in double overtime, thanks to strong performances from DeMar DeRozan and people like that. Then we have our 2 wins we've referenced: the win at Golden State by 16, and then last night's victory that was on January 9th at the Utah Jazz. We avenged the 36-point loss with a 5-point win, but a win is a win. We will take it. So that puts the Heat at 2-2. Over this span, they are 21st in net rating, which is pretty easy to be when you have a 36-point loss. They're 28th in offense, 7th in defense, to be expected when you get to play Utah twice. Your defense will probably look a little better. But they also held Golden State and Sacramento to pretty pedestrian offensive ratings. But overall, Lino, what have you taken away from these 4 games? Are there players, lineups, anything that's kind of stood out to you?
The first thing, I mean, we're going to get to all the things that were super exciting and super fun. Obviously, we've talked about the really sad thing as far as getting absolutely demolished by the Jazz and Bryce Sensabaugh for some reason having it out for us and wanting to just have the best game ever against us in our time of pure duress. That was very sad. But what was most sad about that game is that we got a good portion of Kashad Johnson that game. And I fear that we will never see him again because of how bad we lost that game, which is sad because it's probably not really his fault. But you
Yeah.
come in, you play 19 minutes, we lose by a billion to the worst team in the league. It's going to be hard to get back out there. And I
Well,
was looking forward to seeing more.
that applies to Jovic starting too. That was the one Jovic starting game we've had in a long time. And Spo was like, "Well, you're gone," and now he's come off the bench for 3 games.
And so that was the worst part about losing to the. Like, I can take us losing badly to the Jazz because our team is a mess right now. We're starting this road trip without our main guy who has expressly decided he wants to play with 29 other teams besides us. The press is all over us. We're trying to travel. We're trying to figure things out. It's okay to give up a bad game to a bad team. These things happen. Overall, we're a 500 team anyways. We're going to lose half of the games. We're going to win half the games. This is just what happens. But the consequences of this game are truly devastating for real Heat lifers who are obsessed with that Summer League 5 that we had and want to see more minutes from them. Those guys are in prison for the rest of the season. It's so sad.
Usually, when garbage time guys come in, like they're excited to get playing time. The other team's up a million. They don't really try, and all those guys still got outscored while they were out there. Like it was, I was reading Cooper Moorhead, who covers the Heat, does an awesome job. He was talking about on his show after the buzzer. He was just saying like, yeah, those guys got minutes about against real competition, and it didn't go great, but they got minutes. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of how it felt. It's like, I'm glad y'all got that experience. We will not see you again until we are down 35 again.
Yeah. So that was kind of a bummer to me, and the main thing I wanted to start out with, because I think those guys, as they go through the development program, they are going to be at least contributing role players for us at some point in time. But the other kind of phoenix that came out of the ashes of this very dismal part of our season is the revival of Jaime Jaquez. Like, he has been really awesome. He was honestly doing really well in that game against the Jazz or against the Kings where we lost in double overtime. And unfortunately is a poster child for one of the many opportunities we had the chance to win that game and decided to either miss a free throw or do something incredibly dumb. And so overall, despite having some missteps in that game, his offensive production has been great. It's been really awesome seeing him get to his bag, his ability to make plays for others and really run the point for us as like a pseudo point forward has been really impressive. And, I think after having a bit of a rougher start and a bit of a sophomore slump, the ability to at least show flashes that guy is still in there this deep into the season is nice because at least we don't have to wait until next year to find out if he's a real deal or not.
Yeah, I've loved what I've seen from Jaime this road trip. I think we'll talk about Tyler some, I'm sure, but teams have decided they are trapping Tyler on every single ball screen. Sacramento is really aggressive doing that with Keon Ellis and Sabonis. And so what Spo pivoted to, which I thought was, a stroke of brilliance, honestly, was putting the ball in Jaime's hand. Jaime's not a high level passer, but he's very strong with the basketball. He makes sound decisions. And you could really see that he felt comfortable in that role. Like he knew if, the whole defense is tilted towards Tyler, moving off some off ball action, trying to come to the ball. Jaime was fine with that. He would just drive his guy, get to the basket, get to his pivot game on the low block. For this 4-game stretch with Jimmy out, Jaime's been at 17 points, 5.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, 55% shooting, 36 minutes a game. So this is like full-time starter, real deal Jaime Jaquez, and he's flourished. I mean, as a Heat fan, we didn't know what was going on. Was it limited minutes? Was it just a confidence thing? So to see him get thrust into a borderline primary role, I think he's been third in usage during this stretch. And he's handled it incredibly well. It's just very encouraging. Lino, you mentioned that it was beautifully poetic. So the Sacramento game, Jaime has 2 open corner threes down the stretch that he missed, and then he misses 2 free throws at the end of the game that could have put the Heat up 3, and instead that leads to it going in overtime and the loss. The following game against Utah, we have the ball. We just won a jump ball. I believe it's tied, or maybe we're up. No, I think it was tied. And Jaime hits a pull-up 3 that Lauri Markkanen just plays off of him. Jaime drills it. They come back, score. Jovic throws the ball away. I'm sure we'll talk about
Just
Nico.
launches that thing.
Nico's also been good, but a whole other conversation. And so then it's time for us to do like inbound the ball, shot clock's off. We know they have to foul, and they throw it into Jaime, and Duncan starts moving towards Jaime, and Jaime's supposed to throw it to Duncan, and Jaime doesn't. He keeps the ball to allow himself to get fouled in another clutch situation. He said this in the post-game interview, and he goes to the line and makes both free throws. And so that felt like a big deal, like maybe the biggest deal of anything that's happened in this 4-game stretch is Jaime had a really tough setback in his confidence. And as somebody that had been playing well, it would be easy to have the rug pulled out from under you. And he decided to meet that moment and respond in such an encouraging way just the next game. So very encouraged by Jaime. You hinted at it's complicated by the fact that he's not going to be playing 36 minutes a game when Jimmy's back. So it's like, how do you balance that? Now we saw as a rookie, like Jaime is able to get his even when Jimmy was there. We also know Jimmy's going to miss a bunch of games, especially if he's not really motivated to play for us. But as a fan, that's again a reason I'm like kind of ready for this transition, just to go with the youth movement. But yeah, 5 stars for Jaime in this stretch. If you don't have any more thoughts on him, I want to know what you thought about Jovic during this stretch.
Jovic, oh, he's a special guy, man. I think he's hard not to love. When he's doing well, when he's not doing well, you just look at him and you're like, what are you doing? But at the same time, he has such an exciting element to his game. Like there's just, especially as we've seen a lot of guys that come in and go through the Heat process and go through like Heat culture and they're built like a Heat guy. And he's kind of always been the opposite of that from my perspective, not in a good or bad way, but like this is a guy who plays a little bit loose and fast with the ball, is very creative, but still gives a lot of effort and has a decent motor as well. And that just translates into such different versions of basketball from night to night sometimes with Nico. But this stretch has been really impressive as far as him just stepping up and trying to be a little bit stronger with the ball at times and trying to make the right plays. But they're always accented by some of the most boneheaded decision makings, especially down the stretch in important moments. There's a couple moments there at the end of the game with this last matchup with the Jazz where he was inbounding the ball. For some reason, Spo really wants Jovic to become a premier inbounder for this team. And every time Jovic manages to do the dumbest thing possible in any given
Yeah,
scenario.
he had a bad inbound against Sacramento too. As one of the last possessions, he just like couldn't get it in. It got deflected. Time expired. We had a timeout. We had a timeout on the situation where he threw it away too, and he's just like,
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
figure it out.
Launch it. But he's doing some great things out there. I love the thing about Jovic that I love the most is that there's something so interesting about every pairing he has on the floor. Like when we put him out there with Khalil Ware, that is awesome. When he's out there with Tyler and previously Jimmy, that's really cool. When we see him with Duncan, like that, his mix up and the way he plays around the other guys it feels like a different guy every time he's playing those different roles, but it just feels like he complements whoever he's playing with in a weird way. And I've just been relatively impressed about his future because he came in as a guy that we were kind of betting on having a higher ceiling, but kind of starting from a lower floor. And I feel that he can reach that ceiling if we give him the time. But what have you been seeing out there with him? And, how do you feel about, the expectation that he's probably going to be getting a lot more minutes moving forward?
Yeah, well, first off, like you said, to lead off, what a lovable individual. His media availabilities, whether it's post game, press conference, whatever, he is so wholesome. He also looks like a Serbian Dermot Kennedy, which also makes me very fond of him. Yeah, so Nico, 15, 4, and 3 on 41% shooting over these last 4 games. His ball handling is important too. In the same way we talked about it with Jaime, being able to take pressure off of Tyler, let Tyler run off ball actions to get into an advantageous position before the opposition can blitz him or send a double is really important. And like you said, yeah, on offense especially, Nico is just like everyone's Swiss Army knife. If you need him to run a pick and roll, he can do that. He can spot up for you. His drives, I've really liked recently. He's not a great finisher around the basket, but he has been applying some good rim pressure. His free throw rate seems to be up. So I love that kind of aggression from him. And I think he's just, if I had to guess, such a tough player for Spo to manage because I feel like coaches, especially veteran coaches like Spo, like consistency and maybe almost prioritize floor over ceiling. I'm not sure if they'd
Mm-hmm.
say it that way, but it feels like that. He's like, okay, I know what Haywood Highsmith has given me every single night. And if he makes like 2 extra threes, awesome. That's gravy. But I know he's going to be in the right spot on offense. I know he's going to play awesome defense. And with Nico, he's just a chaos engine for better or worse. And that can be so impactful in positive ways for your team, but it can also be really detrimental. And to me, I'm not comparing anyone involved to anyone, but it does feel similar to how I would hear Manu Ginobili and Popovich talk about each other, like in
Mm,
interviews back in the day, when like
yeah.
Pop would just or Manu would just drive Pop crazy with like the flashy pass he would try and make or the wild step back three, and it feels similar to me. And I also I like to think as a Heat fan, it's reflective of the potential that Spo sees in Nico. I think he knows he could be a pivotal player for the franchise, not a franchise player, but a really high level starter that amplifies everyone around him on both sides of the ball for a long time if he can iron out the details in his game. I know recently in a post-game press conference, Nico mentioned that Spo told him, he's not a kid anymore. He has to clean up some of these mistakes. He can't just go out there and, purely have fun. He has to, take his craft seriously. And this is definitely the best he's played, I think, since we've seen him. But he's got to be careful. He had a sequence, I believe it was in the Utah game, where he drove. He didn't get a call. He thought he got fouled. He's complaining to the ref. He's not running back. It's like obvious he's not running back. And then because of that, it's a 5-on-4. Patty Mills gets an open three. Khalil Ware has to jump out at Patty Mills, which shouldn't be happening in the first place. Khalil fouls him, 4-point play and a flagrant. So a massive swing in the game that really put it in jeopardy. And that's the kind of thing. I mean, the Heat kind of prioritize not complaining to officials anyway. That's something that just isn't, they don't like their players to do. And Spo immediately benched Nico in that moment. Haywood came in for him. But just a few minutes later in the fourth, Nico did come back in. So I was like, okay, I think that's the perfect balance for Spo. Sit him if he does something that crazy, but then give him the chance to redeem himself. Unfortunately, in this instance, he didn't redeem himself because we were up 5 with the ball and he threw like a full court length pass for some reason with like the ref had handed him the ball. He had in his hands a second. Like Tyler hadn't even started coming towards the ball. And Nico's like, oh, I see him down there, and just launches a full court pass. Of course, it gets picked off, puts the game in jeopardy. So you got to take the good with the bad, but he's still so young. I think I saw he's the second youngest player on the team. He's just 21. So plenty of time for him to develop. Love the offensive upside. And, defensively, I think he's fine. Metrics like him defensively. He's got good size. He's not a crazy athlete or anything, but I think he's doing his job. So Nico, he's been at 26 minutes a game. I like that for him off the bench. I feel like that's a good spot. I don't know if he necessarily needs to start because I love him and Ware playing together. I feel like
agree.
they have a lot of good synergy. And everybody loves throwing the lobs to Khalil. But I think that's a good person to turn to now. Of course, all of Heat Nation is very excited about Khalil Ware. So did you have any takeaways from him recently over these last 4 games?
The main takeaway is that I think I love our guys too much sometimes. Like, I think I love this team a little bit too much, and I'm almost always looking at them through rose-colored glasses because I was watching these past 4 games in which Khalil's, his minutes are starting to creep up, and I'm watching. I'm like, man, this is awesome. This guy looks really good. And then I'll shoot you a text and be like, man, Ware looks good. He's like, yeah, I wish he'd play some freaking defense. And I'm like, I thought he was playing defense. And so clearly, and I see it online too, like people talk about his rebounding, the defense isn't really there. And I was like, dang, I must not be watching games the right way. Because every time I was there, like, man, this kid's doing a really good job. But I just don't think I'm looking at him critically enough. But overall, that is to say, I've really enjoyed his development so far. There's definitely stuff to work on. But the effort and some of the decision making show that he can do the job that we need him to do, so long as he gets the opportunity to do so. The rebounding, I feel like we saw improvement game over game with that, as well as some really cool flashes with passing out of the short roll, making the right decision while protecting the rim, not overcommitting too much for blocks. Like, I don't really feel like I see him chasing blocks nearly as much, but he also really doesn't let anybody get away with a floater over the top of him. So that's been really exciting to see as his defensive IQ starts to increase alongside his offensive IQ. So I feel so good about that pick, and I think that certain lineups really, really highlight what he can do, especially when we get multiple passers around him. It's really awesome having a legitimate lob threat that doesn't have to fight for his life to get up there. Like Bam obviously has a history of being a lob threat, but that was with elite passers like Kyle Lowry, and it also required Bam to literally jump out of the gym because he's like 6'9", whereas Khalil, I've seen some people throw some insane passes. Duncan threw a lob to him that felt like it was going to hit the Jumbotron. Like, what the hell was that? And he still caught it and just threw it into the basket from above it because it was the only way to make it happen. And so some special stuff to see there, but definitely a work in progress. What are you thinking of our rook so far?
Yeah, I think when you talk about rookies, especially big men, I always try and stay measured in it because I think overall I am super pleased with what he's shown. Like, to me, he's probably borderline ahead of schedule for like a project big, which is like what he was labeled as coming in. So offensively, the touch looks good. The lob threat is obviously awesome. The 3-point shot, I mean, he seems confident in it. It's fluid enough. I trust that that'll be a real weapon later in his career. I love that you shouted out the short roll passing. To me, that's like one of those things where if he never had that, it wouldn't be a big deal. But the fact that he already And guys, like, don't go look up Khalil Ware assists and be like, what are you guys talking about? But he'll just, Tyler's getting trapped all the time. And so he'll hit him with that little bounce pass every once in a while. And Khalil, I feel like, has just done a good job. You'll see so many young bigs. If they catch on the short roll, they're like, I got to go to the basket. And they'll pick up charges. They'll just throw up wild shots. But he catches it, pivots, and then scans the court. I feel like almost every time off the short roll. And he's made some passes. They're not like super accurate. They might not be, super timely as far as like a very quick processor, but he's looking to make a pass out of the short roll, which to me is step number one, and then the rest can be developed. And I think with Khalil, that's, as a fan, probably the most exciting and interesting part is how much of the flaws in his game are able to be ironed out by this coaching staff, because there are flaws. Like the way he rebounds is perplexing to me. This was Hoop's profile on YouTube did a good video about this, where they highlighted how many rebounds he goes after with one hand. And I've noticed this with loose balls too. Like he just like acts like once he touches it first, no one else is allowed to touch it. And there's so many times where I'm like, man, if you would have sent two hands up there with your giant wingspan, a giant vertical, like no one would have had a chance at getting that. And I text you. I think you can see, like, I think that was the Sacramento game where it was at its worst. And in the Golden State Utah game, I think he was much more aggressive, trying to go after the ball. I thought he showed some good hands in the Utah game. He swiped down, got some steals, which, with somebody of his length, you'd want him more focusing on shot blocking. But if he's showing out on pick and roll coverages, I think that's encouraging. So overall, really happy with what I've seen. He's playing with pretty good energy. Very proud of Spo for playing him. Kevin Love was out last game, but it would be very easy for Spo to go to what he knows, go to what's safe. That could be Kevin Love. That could even be Nico at 5. That's probably feels safer to Spo than playing Khalil. So I'm excited he's doing that. And yeah, to me, it's just going to be like his motor, his technique, rebounding, boxing out. The guy's over 7 feet tall. He's never had to box out for a rebound his entire life.
Yeah.
He's never had to learn that. Now he's at a level where he does have to, and we'll just see. I mean, I'm very confident in the coaching staff and their availability or their ability to develop players. So I'm pretty excited about it. Have you seen anything that makes you like more or less confident about the viability of he and Bam playing together?
It's not happening, dude. We're never going to see it. It's watching them both play separately. Unfortunately, it just isn't going to work. Like Spo is just never going to believe in something like that, as far as neither of them are necessarily a confident enough 3-point shooter to really feel comfortable putting them there. And the rebounding, like, somebody has to be a good rebounder on the floor. And for some reason, we're only getting that from our wings. Bam's rebounding, it's just always, it isn't easy for him, especially against tough opponents. Like when we're playing really good centers or really large bigs out there, he struggles there for sure. And so we need them to play separately. And so I am probably at the lowest confidence level that we'll ever see those two actually share the court.
Yeah, this season I definitely don't see it. I will say what Cleveland is doing, not that either of our guys are like either of their guys, but the way that Cleveland has decided to play two bigs with Mobley and Jared Allen, but has emphasized switching. They switch at the highest rate in the league is so interesting to me, because I feel like that's a really smart move, because they're like, yeah, we'll switch Jared Allen out on your guard. He might just force a contested jumper. And if he doesn't, we still have a rim protector back here. And that's why the Heat have had to go away from switching so much. It used to be their best, most used coverage in the PJ Tucker, Kyle Lowry era. But it's because teams just figured out, oh, Bam will switch on to anybody. We'll use that to our advantage. We'll get him switched onto a shooter. And then that guy's just getting out of there. And now our whole team gets to play against your guys without a rim protector. So maybe if Spo sees that over the summer, he'd be like, well, I do miss switching. I do love switching. So, and Bam always leads the league, or is close to leading the league in box outs. So, he boxes all the guys out, and then Khalil can just grab the
That would be
rebound.
nice.
So,
I can see it for how I would coach the team, but unfortunately, I am not a basketball genius that gets paid millions and millions of dollars to do it. Because I was thinking the same thing. I was like, it would just be nice to be able to play a lineup with Bam, Khalil, Jovic, as our front court. Like that is an incredibly sound defensive front court. Like that works for us, and it's very switchable for the most part, especially if you were to throw in, Haywood Highsmith in there for like a two guard or something, and then Tyler's out there, and we can hide Tyler a little bit, and we can switch off
Mm-hmm.
of him, but he can just feed people into Bam and Kalel. Like
Right.
that is something that makes sense to me when I think about it out loud, and I just have to assume I don't know enough about how this team works because I'm sad that we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it is kind of exciting to think about, like, oh, every team's like picking on Tyler. They're trying to get him switched on their best guy, and then they drive, and Bam and Kalel are back there. And it's like, oh, not as easy as it used to be. So yeah,
Oh
it
man.
is exciting, and we'll see. And I had one other point based off what you just said. I can't remember if it was something with Nico or what, but anyway, we can move on. But I'm very excited about the prospect of it. Again, Heat fans don't expect it this year, but I do wonder with Cleveland's success if it's something that Spo will think about. And then, of course, we talked about defense for that whole segment. The offense would probably be tough. Like it would probably be very hard to have a good offense. Bam and Kalel would really need to elevate as processors, which we've seen Evan
Hmm.
Mobley do this past year. But Bam would like catch on the short roll immediately, like the Draymond roll. Draymond catches on Steph's short roll and then is immediately looking for Kevon Looney for the lob, like back in the Warriors' heyday. Bam would have to start, being that level of processor, which isn't easy to attain, but that's the other
Yeah.
thing that would have to happen. Maybe even more than crazy 3-point shooting by either of them, just high, feel kind of stuff.
Which I believe that Bam can do that because I think Bam is a high processor in particular ways and just not when it comes to his individual shot selection. I think honestly in most other aspects, I mean, he runs a very complex two-man game with most players and he manages four different ones at the same time as far as what he does with Tyler, what he does with Duncan, the game he plays with Jimmy. Like he'll share the floor with all three of those guys and be ready for whatever actions come out of that or moving the ball around there. Like he can do it. He just for some reason really struggled with it out of the pick and roll this year as a screener more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he can definitely develop that kind of game to where the ball can still move around a lot in that type of lineup. We just kind of have to see them get the reps in for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Bam, another good person to talk about now. I think I've watched Bam so closely this year. He struggled so much offensively. He's still super valuable, defense, screening, everything he does. But yeah, I think his roles, like literally not his role, but how he rolls to the rim versus popping, has been a real hindrance on his game this year. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in theory, it was like, okay, you add the 3-point shot, that adds spacing, it makes the defense harder to guess. But for fans listening, next time you watch the Heat, Bam sets a screen for Tyler, Duncan, whoever it might be. They come off of it dribbling. Does he roll or does he pop? And how does that possession go? If I had Synergy or Second Spectrum, I would love to look this up because when he rolls, so many more good things happen in my opinion. And it's not like Kalel where like he's getting a lot of dunks off of it, but he's either catching in the short roll, he has good roll gravity, so the defense is sinking in, Tyler kicks to a shooter. But when he pops, it effectively does nothing. Like there were several sequences, I believe it was against Sacramento, where he would set a screen, Tyler would come off of it, Tyler would either get blitzed or try and get an angle, and Bam would pop. And so Tyler drives, both defenders just stay with Tyler. Tyler's like at the rim, and both defenders are still with him. And so Tyler's only option is to throw a hook pass back to the top of the key. Bam catches it. Teams aren't afraid of him at the 3-point line. He's shooting like 31%. It makes sense. Sabonis just kind of meanders back out there, and then Bam just goes into a dribble handoff with Duncan and then rolls. And I'm like, we could have just started the possession with that and actually got
Adler's had some
going.
more time. Yeah.
Yeah. So my wife and I have like, she'll start yelling out like, oh, he rolled, he rolled, he rolled. And then it feels like every time he does, something good happens. And, when he pops right now, it's just not great. But I do like the theory of this is like a growing pains year. I
Hmm.
feel like hopefully, and the guys have to get used to it too. You can see Tyler's like, okay, I'm running this pick and roll. Where's my roll guy? And he's like, oh, Bam popped. I'm not used to Bam popping. So, you see guys like Miles Turner is a great example of a big who kind of layers in pops and rolls. somebody like that. Porzingis does it too to a degree. It's something Bam will have to learn, or he might just abandon 3-point shot altogether.
Yeah. I think I really wanted to, second your point that there's a really good chance that this is just kind of a growing pains year for Bam. And I think as a fan base, we've been a bit spoiled because of his constant progression and his ability to grow to, what many believe is all defense level. And some argue could be an all NBA type guy, and the reputation he garnished over the offseason through the Olympics. People go into this season, and obviously he's had a disappointing season so far through a lot of different metrics. And I think that's okay. I think, nobody's path is linear to where you just keep getting better and better and better. Like none of us are just LeBron or Steph. Like we don't just continue to get better. And even some of those guys had down years where Steph shot very poorly and nobody was like, oh, well, I guess he's done being the greatest shooter ever. Sometimes you're trying to work on your game or things outside of your control are happening and the season you have is not the one that you hoped for. But the hope is that Bam can come back to, playing more confidently, playing more efficiently, and being able to develop his game in a way and kind of, I guess, get his mind around what he's trying to do out there. So many times it seems like he just doesn't know exactly what he wants to do and then what he's trying to do. And then what ends up happening all end up being a little bit worse than they used to be. Even with
Mhm.
his mid-range shooting, like that's never something people really had to complain about in the past. He was a pretty awesome mid-range shooter, but with the indecisiveness and the difficulty to get to his spots and his sometimes a lack of post game, it looks worse this year, and I think people are probably piling on him a bit too much for a guy who's pretty much not had a bad season since he started. So, hopefully he figures it out. We'd really love it if he did. That would be quite a game changer for us if he could get back to at least square one on this stuff. But I'm confident that he's going to come back. Not even by next season, but maybe sooner. I think he could figure this out mid-season and really catch his stride. There's still a lot of games left to be played, and so, yeah, I that is what I want to say about Bam. Lay off a little bit, guys.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, and that honestly, if we want to be super optimistic, this season's kind of nuked anyway as far as like playoff aspirations. So if Bam's gonna have a growing pains year, and we're getting Tyler all these reps of getting trapped, like next season could be could be great. So
Listen,
it's
we're gonna make the playoffs this year. By the way, I know everybody's kind of out, but there's
yeah, I
we're
will.
gonna make that. There's only three good basketball teams in the East, and we can be one of the last 10.
Yeah. I mean, it probably will come down to like a single game against like Atlanta or Detroit or something.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
we'll see. But the Heat are going to be very motivated to make the playoffs, just as a quick like front office aside, because I'm sure as a lot of there's protections on their draft pick this year where if they're in the lottery, they keep it. If they make the playoffs, they give up their pick, which in theory, like, oh, you don't want to do that. In this situation, you do, because if they give up this pick to Oklahoma City this year, that's fine. It's lottery protected, so it's not going to be a top 14 pick. Next season, if they don't give it to OKC this year, it'll be unprotected in 2026, which means, all our team gets hurt. We have a top 3 worst record. OKC is still getting that pick. There's no protections on it. So as a Heat fan, I know it's fun to think about capture the flag, let's tank. Ideally, you want to make the playoffs this year because you don't want to give up unprotected picks to team. So that's something to keep in mind going forward. But yeah, we're getting to the end here. I had Terry Rozier in my notes. Honestly, just hoping Terry plays better. It's he's still very active.
I
He's
still believe.
okay. Awesome. That's
I'm
good.
still in.
Hear
Everybody
that,
else, I get
Terry?
it. Sell your stock. I'm still buying Terry's stock. He's gonna be awesome once he
Okay.
starts making shots. It's tough right now.
It
It's
is.
bad, and it's been
Yeah.
longer than a season. The goal was, he'd have a full off season. He'd come back and play like the Terry Rozier that we knew.
No.
He's having a little bit of arrested development in that, but the effort is there. The vibes are there too. Like he's struggling, but he's bigging up his guys. He's literally going to fight for his team. He is being very positive with others. Like he's still trying out there. And it's not like he's taking an insane amount of shots either. None of them are going in, and
Right.
that is a problem.
Boy.
But
I tell you, you look through those box scores. It is
It's bad.
spring, summer tour dates the whole way down. 3
Yeah.
for 12, 4 for 15. Like
Oh man.
it is rough. But I won't lie, and Heat fans listening to this are probably gonna get livid. I had a similar thought during the Utah game. He got like his third steal, did a behind the back
Hmm.
pass to Jaime for a layup, and I was like, man, if this guy made shots, this isn't a bad
That's all
basketball
it is.
player.
He's just missing shots. Like the play on the court isn't that bad. Like there's some things where he maybe does a little too much, and he can be prone to dribbling too much. But that's if you want a good point guard or a good shooting guard, you're going to get a guy who dribbles too much. There's not, that not every point guard plays like Jimmy Butler and Jaime Jaquez Jr. Like you got to have a bag, and he has that. And he plays that way. And it's honestly not as worse as I've seen with a guy like Jordan Poole or people that people generally hate when it comes to this kind of position.
Yeah,
And
that's
if
a
he
great
just,
example. Jordan Poole's making shots this year. Last year, it
yeah,
looked like his career was over. So, hey, and I
yeah,
will say, just as a last thing, and this is we're making so many excuses, but we're not able to move that contract, guys. If you're listening, unless it's somehow with the Jimmy trade, which that adds $20 million, so it probably won't be. Terry's going to be on the team probably this year and probably next year. So all we could do is hope he gets better. And I will say it's worth noting that neck injury he had to end last season was serious. Like Barry
yeah. It took
Jackson,
him forever to come back.
yeah, he got to like started playing 5-on-5s like a month before training camp. Barry Jackson reported at the time, he said it's not believed to be career threatening. I hadn't considered it could be, Barry. Why would you say that? So that gives you an idea of the severity of what he went through. And I don't know, maybe it's just messed up forever, but I hope, like, in football they talk about it's always the year after the ACL where the running back is kind of back to full form. So maybe with
Mm.
enough time from this injury, things will get better. And again, guys, like, I guess if it makes you feel better, you can pile on Terry and say, oh, it's the worst trade ever. But at the end of the day, we're in it now. He's on the team. He's going to be on the team.
It's our
And
guy.
I will say, I do get people that are like upset with how much he plays because I also don't
The starting
understand
thing is crazy.
why
The
Duncan
starting
is.
thing is very crazy.
We don't have time to get his lineups, but Duncan's so good in that starting lineup.
Mm.
Spose, what would you call that? I don't want to say obsession. The faith he has in Terry
Yeah.
is admirable. He has more faith than anyone.
He's probably got the same line of thought as me. Like me and Spo have all the Terry stock.
He's just
We're
like
just
law
running
of
it out.
averages. He can't keep
Diamond hands.
missing. They have to go in eventually.
Oh man.
So shout out Terry. It's gonna get better. Lino, do you have any closing thoughts? Anything we didn't get to that you wanted to hit on for this episode?
No, I think we ran it up. I'm just want to say, to if we have any listeners out there in Los Angeles, just praying for you guys. Any basketball fans, anybody out there on the West Coast, in Southern California that might be affected by those raging fires right now, very devastating, but wishing you guys the best. And yeah, hopefully they can get some resources out to start helping people, improve their situation over there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's well said. And it is worth noting the Heat have 2 games in LA this coming week. So we
Mhm.
already saw one Lakers game get postponed. There's a real chance those games could be moved. Yeah, it's just awful what's happening out there. And then you said it well. Our thoughts are definitely with everyone dealing with those fires. It's unreal. So yeah, we'll see you guys for the next episode. Like we said, there are some upcoming games that are winnable. We have at Portland next, but then we also have at the Clippers, at the Lakers, and then home for Denver, which is the Jimmy return game. That will be Friday. I assume we will be recording the day after that because we will have to talk about whatever happens then. So we'll see you guys next week. Will Jimmy be on the team? Will he not? Find out next time on Heat of the Moment, featuring your pals, Micah and Lino. Check us check us out on socials, YouTube, Spotify. We're also on TikTok, Bluesky, Twitter. We'd love any kind of interactions you guys have, any questions, anything like that. It makes it fun. That's kind of why we're doing this, is to build a fun, welcoming community of Heat fans. So definitely hit us up. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you guys next time.